This is the Ronin of philosophy, where I take a look at philosophical ideas and thought patterns and try to look at them from objective points of view and alternate points of view to kind of get at the truth of why people think about them and the effects that they have. So the inspiration for this actually comes from a Netflix series I was watching a few years ago, which was actually a remake of an 80s cartoon called Voltron. In this new adaptation of Voltron, they took and kind of reversed some of the roles that were traditional to the characters. Some characters were made to be female, others were made to be gay, or just turned out to live instead of where they originally had died, and so on. But one of the things that the series was somewhat, I guess you could say, most famous or notorious for was its portrayal of male relationship. In particular, the relationship between two of the main protagonists, Keith and Shiro. The series presents the both of them as two brothers almost, where Keith is the hot-tempered, hot-headed younger brother who's always going off at the mouth, always getting in trouble, talented pilot and everything, but just not reliable when it comes to being a responsible person. And Shiro is presented as the older brother, more mature one, the one who understands his position and his authority and tries to make the right and responsible decisions for the rest of the team and whatnot. Now, because of their close relationship, there were a lot of fans that, whether famously or notoriously, liked to ship the two characters together. Shipping basically means that people fantasize about two characters who are not, or at least not as of yet, portrayed as having a relationship to be fictionalized as having a relationship. And they were two of the big ones for that series. This was especially helped by the fact that they did make out Shiro to be an actually gay character in this interpretation of the series. So therefore, it was a lot easier to, quote unquote, ship them. Having said that though, their approach instead by the producers was made to be, as I said earlier, more brotherly instead of romantic, non-sexual rather than sexual. And that seemed to upset a lot of different people. And what was surprising to me was people who were progressive about it were upset by this portrayal as well, because they wanted to see a gay relationship and not just two men who were good friends. So a little backdrop as to why this mindset tends to exist. In traditional society, at least traditional Western society, male-male relationships outside of family have always been stoic and rooted in brotherhood and camaraderie. Take, for example, the HBO World War II series Band of Brothers, where perfectly and literally plays off this. Other examples tend to include the Clint Eastwood types from the old 1960s Western movies, or even as recently as in the 80s and 90s with the characters played by Sylvester Stallone, Vin Diesel, more recently actually, and Arnold Schwarzenegger as these kind of cold, stoic, almost non-emotional responses and expressions by men who are all the while at the same time still strong, powerful, and being very capable. The most recent iteration of this is the John Wick movies, where even though he is made to be a vulnerable character because the character is trying to recover from his wife dying and trying to stay out of the mob life, at the same time he's very stoic. He doesn't say much and he kills a hell of a lot of people. So there you are. Now, to be fair, this is a sliding spectrum. These types of heroes are not always simmering with machismo. They're not always blunt, blatant, and aggressive, but can give just enough hints of it just beneath the surface. Explosive action at some point in time was always kind of their trademark and what everyone in the audiences and everything was looking for and expected of them. Most importantly, however, nothing could be interpreted as weak or vulnerable, or, as the first word that comes to a lot of people's mind, feminine or pussies. Anytime such behavior was shown was very quick, It was very private, like with children or sometimes with other women, and was never put on display for others to see outside of those few relationships and people. So what this made for male relationships was a kind of uncomfortableness when two men were confronted with bonding each other, or quote unquote worse, if they had to tell that they loved each other, even as brothers. Because even if it was done in a non-sexual manner, that kind of vulnerability and display tends to feel extremely uncomfortable for those type of men. It's very, very alien, and it can be considered so alien and foreign that the only conclusion that usually the viewer is led to conclude is that two men that close, saying they love each other, they're touchy and affectionate, they must be gay. And honestly, even the progressives tend to fall into this trap. It's become very commonplace now that even though it's supposed to be an improvement, and it is an improvement, that men can be shown in more openly romantic relationships these days, at the same time, there's also a forced expectation as well that it's one or the other. They're either gay or they're not gay, and there is no in between. One perfect example of this was during the Lord of the Rings trilogy that came out in the 2000s. In all three movies, you had both types of relationships of men on display. On the one hand, you had the traditional male camaraderie brotherhood, male friendships of Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas, and how they bonded together during combat and war, always sacrificing for each other, always willing to do whatever the other needed to help them survive or accomplish their goals. And then on the other hand, you had Frodo and Sam, where there wasn't that much combat as Frodo was trying to make his way towards Mount Doom to destroy the ring. It's mostly just trying to survive, trying to sort out what Gollum's relationship to the two of them are, and just a lot of quiet moments and everything. And the way that it was portrayed was where typically Sam was always thought of as being the one who was gay for the most part, and not loving Frodo in a brotherly manner, as many traditionalists of Tolkien literature tend to take Tolkien's works whenever he has two men say that they love each other. Especially interesting since the fact that Tolkien was Catholic, so he probably wouldn't have been all for a homosexual interpretation on that. The movies, however, tend to portray their relationship as very kind of light, more focused on emotions and trust rather than combat, etc. So therefore, the traditional categories in which we define, a male relationship are not there. It's not matching up, basically. And therefore, the only conclusion that many people made, rightly, wrongly, right or left or whatever, was that, well, since Sam and Frodo are not matching these criteria of a male relationship as we understand it, therefore they must be gay. They're looking at each other funny, they have to be gay. They're kissing each other, on the forehead or whatever, even though it's not sexual in any kind of way, they must be gay. And so on and so on. And this mindset, this zero-sum, black and white view of it has to be one or the other, is very typical of Western society for both right and left. Both views tend to have a either with us or against us kind of mentality when it comes to social depictions of relationships with each other and how they want to see themselves, because everyone wants to be accepted. Everyone wants to have their values and beliefs and their feelings considered equal to everyone else's, and therefore it has to be one or the other. There can't be a middle ground or in between. And I find this is the failing in not allowing men to show brotherly affection, for two men to say that they love each other and have it genuinely be out of love and not rooted in combat, nor at the same time be sexual at all. This kind of capping of emotions and feelings and confining it to be either sexual or aggressive or and traditional can often lead to problems mental health wise with men, to the point where there's a reason why men have a higher suicide rate than women, in our society. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're just not allowed to express certain feelings and emotions. And normally this is thought of as being, the right-wing conservatives' fault for pressing for decades upon us the traditional view of what men had to be. But at the same time, I think that the progressives are just as guilty of this, because now they, or many of them, activists and whatever, are saying that if two men are close and in say that they love each other, they have to be gay. And granted, that comes from a good place, because they hardly see men and men relationships presented in a positive light to begin with. So it's not exactly like they're just doing it for, ego's sake or trying to be trendy. But at the same time, it still falls into the same trap. The results and the fruits of that are the same thing, where men just feel kind of bonded and trapped in having to watch our own back, so to speak, of how we show affection to each other. So at best, maybe you could do like a fist bump or a quick hug or whatever, but God forbid anything more than that, because if you do, you're either gay or you're a homophobe. And that's where the whole Voltron example kind of came in, because it portrayed openly, for the first time at least that I saw, two men having a close, loving relationship that was not sexual in any way, shape, or form, and at the same time was not necessarily rooted in combat and battle as well. And because of that, it was so interesting watching people on both sides get pissed at that. It was very weird. It was an honest portrayal, I think, of the spectrum of humanity, in terms of that, it can be all over the place of where our feelings and where our relationships fall on. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. There's nothing wrong if they're particularly stoic or whatever, and if they chose that, okay, fine. Just as there's nothing wrong if they're being loving and they're in a sexual relationship, that's just as fine. But so is the portrayal and depiction of two men who say that they love each other and have it not be neither. People should be allowed to have that freedom as well. And if at any point in time that freedom is denied, just as much as the extremes of left or right, then honestly, there's a problem, and it creates that tension in men and in our society of having to kind of, in a sense, watch our backs all the time, because we don't want to be called weak, and we don't want to be called gay either, or because otherwise we don't know what to call ourselves at that point, and we don't have that social validation for our own self-worth. So I'm all for multiple expressions of the different types of relationships that men have, but let it be open, let it be free. Let men say that they love each other and hug each other genuinely, and not have it be sexual all the time.